Hello, YouTube. Just a couple minutes late here, but I briefly forgot how to live stream, so it happens. So anyway, I've got a guest here today. His name is Jacob Clearfield. He's a Catholic author. He's got his first book out, and we're going to have a chat today about his.
Hey,
book,
I don't know if you heard, but
book, but also related fiction in general, dystopian fiction. But he writes Catholic fiction with a sort of that's rooted heavily in Catholic prophecy and the other kinds of things we like to talk about on this channel. So I figure y'all might find this to be an interesting conversation. So how you doing today, Jacob?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. He and I have been chatting for a little while, but just trying to get the stuff coordinated is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Oh, I've got people in the chat already, or in the thing already asking who it's going to be. I guess some of that is from a few minutes ago. Someone is saying, let's see. People asking, thinking it's EMJ. I would have him on if I could figure out how to do it without having my channel nuked off the internet. So,
yeah, I haven't gotten that controversial yet. Maybe once they get to know me better.
So, Jacob, why don't you tell people about your book here, just without giving away the plot, of course, and where they can find it online. And I'm going to go find it on online, and I'll drop a link in the chat periodically.
Sure. So the book is titled Anno Domini 2064. Obviously, was trying to kind of hint with the title that it's a dystopian novel, that there is at least some, obviously 1984 is probably the best known dystopian novel. So it's not meant to be 1984, just updated. And that's why the Anno Domini is there, to really show the Catholic influence on it, but also kind of giving at least the clued in reader a little bit of an idea of what to expect from the book. And I have to say, I'm actually really happy with the cover. If people are able to check it out, it's over on Amazon.
And I just dropped a link in the cover.
Perfect. Yeah, Cecilia Lawrence made the cover. We worked together on that. She's one of my favorite current creators of Catholic icons.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, she was kind of interested in doing something a little bit different. I had seen that she had done a few book covers in the past, so I reached out to her, and she was actually kind of really excited to do a new project.
So in the chat, Doctor Who 1980, who's a regular listener to the stream, asks if it's like Lord of the World, because I mentioned it last month on the channel. And I'm going to say kind of, because I've read it.
Yeah.
I read the book all the way through. Sort of. Imagine if, though, the book was set more in one of the countries in that world. I mean, I'm just going to say it takes place in basically the United States predominantly,
right.
But it's... I would say
in
a similar kind of world, except way earlier in that timeline. And I don't think Father Benson, when he wrote that book, actually spent any time really with a lot of Catholic prophecy, other than probably what Cardinal Manning and Cardinal Newman and what the church said, was dogmatically you were required to believe in about the end times. And then he just sort of crafted based on that, and sort of based on the same sort of observations that Chesterton had about what was likely to come. And Benson's book is pretty spooky, to be honest with you. Like you can get a good idea about the end times just by sticking with officially what the church says you have to believe.
Yeah. And I would say, too, that this book is not meant to necessarily be a vision of the end times. We might very well be in an approaching end time situation right now. And I think, regular watchers of your channel will probably have some awareness as to why.
Right.
But we can't be sure of that. And frankly, there have been periods in history where if you lived in a certain place and you were a Catholic or even, a Christian, say like Eastern Orthodox in Russia, you lived in a very dystopian world. And that may also be what we're facing. We may not be at the end. We may just be facing a dark period in history. And so I wanted to play the thought game of, okay, what happens if some of the trends that we are seeing right now simply carry on to a logical conclusion and nothing stops them?
Right. That's the thing that one of the things I really like about your book is that it's a very recognizable world.
Yeah.
Very recognizable. Other than I'm curious about where you get the name for the country from and other things like that, because I have a hard time like seeing a country with that kind of name. But then again, you kind of hint that there's sort of it's almost like a Maoist version of America. That's sort of what you see in the future. But I do want to push back on one thing. You said
Sure.
You said 1984 is the most well-known dystopian novel. I'm going to say the most dystopian work in the popular culture isn't 1984. It's Star Trek. I'm firmly in the camp that Star Trek is very dystopian. If you realize what you're seeing,
Absolutely.
Because it's maybe not like the original series. Like if you watch Enterprise, you still see that sort. You still see private enterprise going on and private property ownership, and you still see that.
In the original series, they even show that Christianity still exists
until you get to the 1980s movies, where Spock is looking at a picture of the Garden of Eden, and he's talking about it being Earth mythology.
Yeah, they actually kind of have a rewrite there, because in the 1950s version, at one point they talk about the Son of God as I forget the actual episode, but in any case, like they do actually reference Christianity as still existing, and at least some members of Starfleet being Christians, but that got retconned later.
But by the time you get to Next Generation, it's overtly military dictatorship with dystopian overtones. And while I absolutely hate what they've done to Star Trek, and I'm not even a big Star Trek guy, growing up I was always the Star Wars guy who liked Star Trek, but like what they've done to Star Trek lately, where the only thing that I will say that they've done right is really make it clear that the Starfleet is a military dictatorship. That's the only thing they've done right, I think, with it.
What's really funny about series like that is they just refuse to deal with the obvious implications of the nihilism at heart in the philosophy they're using. People would not behave that way if you had a society like that. Like it makes no sense in reality. And again, that's kind of what my book tries to explore is, okay, let's say some of these currents win out and you have a society. I even tried to imagine a society where rather than it failing due to, the problem with communism in part was just that it's not a feasible economic model, right?
Right. I think the Chinese are... and here goes that. Here, this channel gets video immediately will get demonetized by even mentioning that country's name. But what they get right is they still have some kind of private ownership, even if it's only for the betterment of the party. Like right down, like to get a business license, you have to have a noodle cart in Hong Kong. You got to tell them how it will help the party.
Well, I've always thought that what the Chinese are doing is they're looking at older types of authoritarian states. Because let's face it, there's been plenty of states in history where the rulers had absolute power, but they maintained power for hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, how did they do that? Well, they actually had a fair amount of economic freedom going on underneath it, and a lot of times they always had the right to do whatever they wanted, somewhat arbitrarily, but they didn't exercise that too often, such that daily life wasn't livable for the average person.
So some Valentinas asks in the chat, how black-pilled is your book? And I can tell you as someone reading it, I would say it depends what you mean by that, because it clearly takes place in a world where the faithful are reduced to a remnant, but they're
still there.
They're still there. Yeah, it's hopeful, right? It's almost like it's weird in a way that most of the culture has even forgotten about the faith. That's So black-pilled, I don't know.
There's a white pill in it, in that, and I do kind of believe this. If the world got that bad, I think the church would actually be cleansed by it.
That's one thing, right? That I fully agree about, and am looking forward to future installments of your book to get more insight into what the church looks like, because it's. It's almost like we'll have to become like a true remnant and be persecuted to get for the church to get cleansed, is where I'm really thinking this is going. I could be wrong, though. All it would really take would be a pope willing to become a martyr, who would be willing to basically be like the young pope was in the first few episodes of that cable show before he softened, and be willing to become a martyr, and you would get that. Like in that show, my favorite scene is really when he sends that really horrifyingly bad cardinal to Ketchikan, Alaska, to say his mass is outdoor in the middle of the Arctic Circle. That's my favorite scene in that. Aside from like some of those really awesome speeches he gave, but
it was the Pius XIII, absolutely.
Right. So let's see. Someone asks if you are pro Carol Baskin or pro Tiger King. I've never seen this show. I've only watched the reaction videos to it online, and I know exactly what happens in it. Personally, I'm in the state that show takes place in, and so I learned more about that show by just asking people I know about the guy, because people who've lived here long enough know exactly who that person is.
Gotcha. I actually have not watched that show. I've heard people talking about it. I've seen some of the reaction videos and things like that. Absolutely. To me, it looks like there's probably enough questionable content. I'm not sure if I should indulge in watching it at this point. Not saying I judge anyone who does. Certainly, if you want to know what's going on in the culture, I can see why you might want to watch it just to know what people are referring to.
So someone asked what your book is about, and I will say as a reader, it's about, there's a common theme in your book, right? And that's, the main character is dealing with alienation. That's what he's dealing with, and the cure for alienation. And there really is only one cure for alienation, and that's Jesus Christ and his faith. But it's fascinating to me because, there's that scene where where your main character is sort of has put on display for him all the wonderful things that that society gives, and he just sort of laughs it off. Because I remember years before I converted, sitting on a public bus, utterly feeling alienated by everything, and wondering if starting to feel like I'd been born in the wrong century. And that's, I think, a very common thing for converts. But so I think it's really, that book's, from a reader's perspective, it's about conversion, essentially.
It is. I had a few goals in mind when I set out to write this book, and it evolved over time, certainly. But one of them was I wanted to kind of make the argument for why Catholicism is still so relevant to society. Because I don't feel like, unfortunately, we as a church are doing a great job of getting that message out of why people need us so badly. And there's a lot of people suffering as a result of that.
Right.
And frankly, I have friends like this, and it's hard to reach them with this message. And sometimes I've almost just sort of wanted to get down in one place, the full argument of hey, here's why you should be Catholic. And the book, it has some of that in it, quite frankly,
Right. And it sort of reminds me that in real life right now, I've got a friend of mine who, he's a Protestant, and he's, he had, fallen in love with this girl, and now it ended and he's borderline suicidal. And he basically says the only unforgivable sin is sins against the Holy Spirit. Correct. He says God will forgive him if he commits suicide. Not
understanding that forgiveness is for this life.
Right, and this is one of those divides. So if you could keep my friend in your prayers, guys, that would be really appreciated. He needs it right now, and he's not somebody I see very often because we used to work together at my my now side job, and he needs he needs prayers, and he always fancied himself a man of prayer, but now he's drinking himself into a silly place, and I just so please keep him in your prayers.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so for anybody who wants to find the book, I put links in the chat. Here's another one. You can go and have a look. It's on Amazon, and it is available in paperback. I actually earlier thought it was only available on Kindle, and it's available for free on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're on Kindle Unlimited, you can get that book. And as I understand it, that still helps Jacob out too, doesn't it? That helps you out, even if they get it with the Kindle Unlimited.
It does. So I've learned a lot about the publishing industry and trying to get a book off the ground. I did try approaching a few different publishers. In fact, Timothy Gordon was really nice. He actually helped me out a bit. He personally approached, he'd read it, and he took it to a couple of the publishers he's worked with. And unfortunately, basically the response was, we're just not interested in Catholic fiction. So we can have a conversation on that, because I think that is just a tragedy in and of itself.
So wait, which publisher was this?
I don't want to give names.
For some reason, I thought I heard you say Simon & Schuster, which I was going to say that's really ironic, given that they are the people who made millions of dollars selling Malachi Martin's books. But there are some conspiracy theories about that too. But
I don't want to name names because, hey, if this actually goes well, then maybe I could always talk to them in the future again, because I'd still love to work with some of those people. But
right, okay, that's fine. I shouldn't have asked that. No worries. But Nicholas Adams just says that he started a Kindle Unlimited trial and he just downloaded your book. So cool.
Nice.
It's a quick read. Like, what delayed me finishing the book, because I've been reading it for a few weeks, was the fact that I was revising my doctoral dissertation, and that takes a long time to do. So,
yeah.
So there's that.
Pretty good excuse. So
yeah, let's talk about some other works though. Like, I took a class on that was called The Political Thought of George Orwell, and half of the things we read in the book were books that probably influenced Orwell's writings. Right, for dystopian fiction. So there's this one science fiction novel that a lot of people have never heard of by an author. I think his name is Zamniev or something like that. It's called We. He was a Soviet writer who, after he published it, he had to leave the Soviet Union because the state figured out pretty quickly that he was writing about the logical conclusion of their system, and so. Now remember, this was written in the 1930s, so it wasn't advanced. It wasn't an advanced technology dystopia, but in his novel, everyone's houses were made of glass that could be tinted for 1 hour a day. Otherwise, everybody could see everything you were doing, and there was only one city left that anybody knew about where everything took place, and everything else outside was the so-called green wasteland. So it had this kind of weird environmental vibe that goes into it. Again, the 1930s, like, he could tell, like, where he could already see this weird sort of pseudo-environmentalist stuff going on even back then. And again, the main characters in that book were alienated from everything going on around them, and were looking for different solutions, which they found in the green wasteland. But you see a lot of this stuff that, Orwell probably read, because, people like to point out 1984 and Animal Farm is probably the most famous ones. Personally, I prefer Brave New World because, we're so medicated.
Probably more relevant these days.
We're very medicated, and the two things that are really, like, prevalent in that book is, like, the pharmaceutical industry and impurity. Like, if you've never read Brave New World, there's a derogatory term that begins with the letter S for women who are promiscuous. That word in that book is used to shame women who are not promiscuous. Like, total logical inversion. It's an amazing book to read, and I do recommend that one for people as well.
It's amazing it was written when it was, too.
Well, it's amazing who wrote it, too. It's written by Aldous Huxley, and if you know anything about Aldous Huxley, he wrote that book based on the world his brother, a famous eugenicist, was trying to create as a warning to try to, hammer home, this is what's going to happen if you get your way. So, and there's an amusing little thing in almost every copy of it now, at either the front or the back of the book, the letter Orwell that Huxley wrote to George Orwell telling him that he thought Brave New World was better than 1984. So I love those kind of things. It's like,
I think Orwell's book was probably more pertinent to the 20th century, and Huxley's book was more pertinent to the 21st in a lot of ways.
I do think we're heading towards a hybrid of those two.
Yeah. I think in some ways humans aren't quite as malleable as Huxley's vision had. That's not to say that, in a lot of the basics, it's just that the tactics government has to use are a little different in order to really program people to be compliant in a system. And some of them have to be a little harsher and more 1984 style to keep the elements in line. Mm-hmm. That said, the basic idea of sort of like medicating people and getting them addicted to their vices and holding on to those vices, participating in the system as it exists in order to continue those vices, that's us all over,
Right. Like for instance, there was a thing that happened on Twitter in the fall where people were saying, and I got to be careful how I say this, but there were a lot of Catholic men tweeting about how they wanted to impose the maximum legal punishment on the smut industry and the people who produce it. A lot of people got their accounts banned for that. Yeah. And a few days into this, there were a couple of media outlets, print outlets, saying it was anti-Hebrew to say that. And I was like, going, wow.
Isn't it funny how,
I'm just thinking,
what are you trying to say here, guys?
Right, like I would never say that.
Right. Seems anti-Semitic. Sorry, maybe I should say
no, it's fine. I'm not going to even try to get this monetized. So.
It seems like for them to say that would be the anti-Semitic side, but
right, and it just shocked me.
Yeah. Yeah, the mask slips every once in a while. They can't help but say what they really think.
Valentina says this is a great stream, and it caused his social credit score to go down.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing going on right now is that we're getting our own version of that with the apps. They're trying to force people to download to their phones. There's I shared on my personal Facebook a job listing for people to be tracing people's contacts to get paid for it. I'm like, wow, man.
Yeah. I mean, the world is definitely in the midst of a shift. In some ways, the world we were living in pre-coronavirus.
That's right. I forget. See if Hewlin corrects my terminology. He calls it, he says we should say anti-tractor.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
But I was going to say, I mean, in some ways, the world we were already living in was dystopian enough, but it certainly sets the stage for things to come. And now we get to go through major changes. And whatever powers that be at the helm get to do things that they normally could never get away with all at once.
Right.
So.
I have a video coming later in the week where everyone's favorite international philanthropist and crasher of England's economy, the famous George S., has decided that this is a revolutionary moment and that they have the opportunity to get everything they ever wanted. It's like they're not even hiding it. They are not even hiding it.
They don't feel the need to anymore, Right. That's the interesting thing to watch. But, when the Holy Father's talking about the higher committee for human fraternity.
Well, you know who came out and endorsed that, right? The Italian lodge. The Italian lodge.
I saw that. The lodge did. Yeah. Well, come on now. It's not like he's hiding it either at this point, so why not?
Right. I'm amazed by this. And that's why, they're warning us that we're going to have a second round of the thing going on right now in the fall, just in time for the election. It's like...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we want to talk too much into politics.
I don't want to go into that too much, but... it's still... I try to avoid that subject. I hope that I can, fly under the radar of the coming purges that'll happen before that happens if I just avoid that subject altogether. So besides the fact that you've got I have a nuanced opinion of the guy in the White House and most people don't.
Right. Yeah, having a nuanced opinion on these things usually isn't popular. So
right.
Because I tend to be the same way. But
Thomas Huxley was a degenerate. Which one was it, Thomas or Aldous, or was it both of them?
I'd say they were both degenerates, but
right. I mean, that doesn't mean he didn't write a prophetic book, because honestly, he could see where everything was coming, probably because he was keyed into the groups pushing things. I
will say this. Frankly, this is partly also why I really wanted to have a Catholic dystopian novel out there, because let's face it, we're just not really represented in the genre, which is kind of strange.
I mean, we have Benson's book, but that's about it. And your book really feels like it reminded me tonally in some ways of the urban fantasy genre, the typical tropes and of the urban fantasy stuff, which is really just, hey, what would happen if I put Lord of the Rings in New York City or Chicago today? Right. It doesn't have any of that junk. It still has that.
There's no magic and elves. It's not Shadowrun.
No, but it's got that readability, which is good for a lot of people because I don't like reading fiction where I have to work for it.
Yeah.
I do enough hard reading that if I want to sit down with a book, I'm happy that it's very accessible. So I'm reading Constance Cumby's book right now on the Lucis Institute, we'll say, and that whole thing. And I do plan to cover more of that. And that book is so accessible. I'm flying through it right now, and it's nice because sometimes I love reading Belloc for my channel, but he's not as accessible, so you have to spend more time with it.
And I'll admit, a lot of times in my free reading, I read a lot of just regular sci-fi and fantasy novels, and I enjoy a bit of escapism. And I suspect that the things that you read the most of certainly influence your writing the most too, certainly in terms of style, if nothing else. So
right. Peter Jansen asks, have we read any fantasy or manga evil theocracies are a basic trope? But here's the thing, his book doesn't have an evil theocracy unless you count militant atheism as an actual religion. Then you have then you have an evil theocracy.
Right. Now, I play around a little bit with what happens in the rest of the world in the book as well.
You do. That's actually where most of the prophecy stuff comes in. So, like, you've got, interesting things going on in Europe where, it looks like, there might be a certain country going to invade in from the east and all these other things going on. And, it looks like things are headed towards the Third World War, basically. And it's fast. It's kind of interesting to watch it because, your characters are observing as third-party participants, right? They're just watching it happen. And if we're alive when or if that stuff unfolds, that's how we will be too, probably. Yeah. Unless,
Well, and that's just it. For most people in history, when this stuff happens, most people are third-party observers. So, I mean, you could certainly set that, and it would be very interesting to have a character going through that. But that really wasn't the point of my novel. But I did want to explore that stuff probably would be going on around the same time period, depending on how things play out.
Right.
And frankly, I tried to set it up as realistic to what's going on from now. Again, I wanted to take the current world and just imagine how it could play out a certain way if things continued along certain trajectories. So not even basing it so prophecy, even though it kind of got to some similar results, I was actually trying to play it off of current geopolitics to a fair extent. Which is
good. Patch asks in the chat if we've read the Benedict option. I have not, because I object to someone who found Catholicism too hard and left the faith, who then makes his living lecturing Catholics. So I object, but I know the premise of it. I'm just going to say in your book, the Benedict option wouldn't have worked.
Right.
It has probably happened to the people who tried that.
Yeah.
And
frankly, I haven't read his entire book. I actually follow Rod Dreher a little bit on Twitter just to see what he's up to.
I think he blocked me, but I don't know.
Okay.
I'm blocked by some surprising people actually on Twitter.
But absolutely right. For someone who left the faith, why should we take too seriously your prescription for what we should be doing in these times?
Yeah.
So
I don't think a lot of people know he left the faith, though. And a lot of people will be like, yeah, but he became Orthodox. I'm like, yes, but that's still leaving the Catholic faith.
I love my Orthodox brothers and sisters, and I understand if you grew up in it, I can see where they've got a much better argument than the Protestants, at least. Their argument's not right, especially if you go back at the history of it. It's pretty clear it's not right.
And their argument is better because they still have apostolic succession and everything else.
They have the sacraments. I mean, it's pretty darn close. It's just, close but no cigar, guys.
Yeah. Peter Jansen asks in the chat why people with Brave New World remember the main character's suicide, but not his defiant speech just before it. And that's a good question. It's a speech that people should read. Varum asks if you were inspired by Lord of the World.
Honestly, that's one I've read a lot of fiction and gotten around to yet. I hate to say it. I've read a lot of dystopian novels, but that one's still on my reading list. I will say, in my defense, I only have so much time for reading these days.
Right.
I'm a physician, and I've been very busy with medical school and residency and a lot of these other things. So I've read a lot of these novels, and I also read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi and other things. So I have not necessarily hit every major novel in the dystopian world. I've hit quite a few of them. I know I kind of gave you a list ahead of time, but that's one I still got to get to. So influence.
Someone asks me if I've listened to Novus Ordo Watch's take on infiltration, and I have not. Maybe I should go watch it. I don't know. I try to stay out of a lot of the internal fighting going on things. This is why I haven't commented on some of the big things going on in our realm. But comments on the left imploding with Michael Moore's Planet of the People. I didn't even know Michael Moore made that. The last thing of his I watched was his medical thing that he did back in 2012 or whatever. That was the last thing of his I watched.
Yeah, I saw some ad that he'd done something, but frankly, I don't bother spending time on him. So
Jerry points out in the chat that that a lot of the Orthodox priests don't even believe in original sin. Well,
that's just it. The Orthodox have a lot of their own problems that we don't necessarily.
It's my favorite trope is that they're not dealing with heresies like we are. I'm like, are. Oh, they definitely are.
Yeah, we don't hear about it, so it's very easy to assume the grass is greener. Just keep in mind they're decentralized, so you can have people off playing at heresy, and there's really no one to come in and correct them even.
Right, because the worst case scenario, someone does try to correct them, they just go form their own new sect of orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Colin asks in the chat, have we watched Wolf and Sheep? I have, and I actually own a copy of it, and I plan to do a review of it for the channel at some point. I just got to find the time. So
nice.
It's for those who haven't seen it, it's definitely got that EWTN vibe to it. So if you've ever watched their show on Chesterton, where you've got this weird smoky background where the actor playing Chesterton is standing there giving you Chesterton quotes about specific topics, that movie is interviews interspersed with Saul Alinsky doing that EWTN vibe. So it's kind of a weird thing to watch, but it's very good.
Interesting. I don't know if it's worth bringing up, but I did want to say, in terms of novels that influenced my book, in addition to just dystopian novels, I actually want to give a big credit to Archipelago.
Yeah, that's on my list of things to read. I just haven't had time.
It's a great book, and honestly, I discovered it because I kind of followed the Jordan Peterson phenomenon a bit.
I did too, but after a while, I was following it out of concern about the number of people who go from atheism to atheistic Christianity, where they become cultural Christians but don't believe, and then that's where they stop.
Right. No, it's sad. I hopes that Peterson would eventually make some more progress, because you saw him do some interviews too, where you could clearly see that he understands civilization can't really exist in a way that actually satisfies people and helps them build virtue without Christianity. But he just couldn't actually take the leap, it seems, into historical Christianity, into the historical Jesus. He just didn't want to go there. Maybe he has personally and he doesn't want to say it, but I don't get that sense. I feel like if you're going to do that, you have to be able to say it too,
So Valentinus asks if Vatican III is in the plot of your book. And I can tell you no, that you don't see much. That would
be impossible.
That would be in his book. You don't see much of the hierarchy in the book.
The bits you see, like I said, the church is kind of cleansed by what takes place, but it's very much a remnant in the shadows sort of situation.
So he asks, Mr. Joy asks, was the book inspired by any Marian apparitions?
I've read up a lot on different Marian apparitions, and I suspect that they're in the back of my mind with a lot of these things that I put in there. I don't want to give away the ending too much.
I don't either. I don't want to give away the end of the book either. The end of the book is great.
Thank you.
That's actually I was very pleased that because I will say that it ends on a weird high note.
Thank you. That's kind of what I was going.
I'm glad I got your purpose. And I'm seeing in the oh, okay, we're not skipping anymore. I saw that I lagged, so I'm watching my own stream in an incognito window. That I'll just say it again. It ends on a weird high note. That's all I can say. But Jacob says he didn't. The Marian apparitions were probably in the back of his mind because he's read a bunch of them, but not overtly, basically.
Right. No, I will say that the Gulag Archipelago played a large role in that part of the book as well, because there are chapters in the Gulag Archipelago, if you read it, that really strike you with the reality of living through something like that, and to capture that for my character. And that's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier too, that lived in dystopian societies, and I mean Solzhenitsyn based on like he was terribly pious at all. So, I mean, sometimes, those kinds of situations actually greatly strengthen a person's faith. But,
right. Valentinus says they didn't lucky to in the book, did they? And I'm going to say no, they didn't. It's pretty clear to me, even the church has all but ignored Fatima, Akita, Our Lady of Revelation, Knock. If you believe in Garam Bendal, they've ignored all of it. And they're, thank you for the super chat, Colin. If you have a question with a super chat, go ahead and ask it. But thank you for the super chat; it's appreciated. And Doctor Who points out that Pope Francis likes Lord of the World. He does. So does Benedict XVI. People who like it, if you don't like them, as a negative endorsement of the book, it's actually really good. The one thing you have to get past with that book, Pollock, I know the stream quality is we're streaming during peak times for online use, a Sunday afternoon, and I plan to upgrade here shortly. I'm going to go see if I can get a more nationally known internet service provider who just became available here in town to do it. But I wouldn't take prelates who we may not care for particularly in the church who have endorsed that book as a negative endorsement. It's a really good book. The one thing you have to is how wrong Benson got technology. Like, he got some things really spooky, spot on. The important stuff he got spot on, but his name for airplanes and things are just so weird and that they don't make much sense. But I think I was watching a Tim Pool stream. He was talking about how, if you read science fiction from 100 years ago, they just picture the technology of their day in 100 years more advanced. So firefighters having mechanical wings, is what they expected in 2020.
Well, even if you've read Neuromancer from the 1980s, William Gibson, same kind of thing. He thinks that he really got wrong was he totally missed cellular phones. I mean, he's imagining a world where you have AIs that are practically becoming sapient, and you have basically a Matrix-style entity that people can tap into with their, with their own nervous systems. Which, as a physician, I just find real. But I don't see that happening. But in any case, he imagines all that, but people are still needing to dial in with a telephone. You need to wire things.
Okay, so Julio asks in the chat, have you read The Time Machine? He says to watch the old movie and not that garbage 2002 remake. I'm going to disagree. Watch the 2002 garbage remake because it's so bad. There is one amazing scene in that movie, and it's absolutely amazing. And so you're aware of The Time Machine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you've seen the 1960 movie, their apocalypse is predictable given the Cold War. The 2002 remake, the guy travels from 1900 and he lands just a few years from now in the future. And it's, you got typical Imad around in downtown New York City. And he sees a digital billboard advertising a lunar resort being built. Right? And he's like, oh, that's cool. He hops in his machine, goes barely forward in time at all, and he sees the world is on fire, everything is falling apart, and he stops and sees that the moon is in pieces. Somebody tells him that the guys building the lunar resort put an atomic bomb near the core of the moon to hollow it out, and they cracked the thing like an egg. And that's what causes the apocalypse. And I said, that's actually plausible. Especially if you know anything about the natural resources of the moon. They have a thing that's there. They have a resource that's thought to be potential fuel for fusion reactions.
There you go. Set that maybe off.
Right. Otherwise, that movie is absolutely atrocious. But that apocalypse sequence just made me laugh.
That does fit with that meme for a while of Catholic men wanting to blow up the moon.
Right. Except I don't think the authors of that were Catholic. But I would watch. I do endorse watching the 1960. Time Machine. I've never read the book though. I need to go find it. I went through a kick where I was reading old weird fantasy novels several years ago. I read the first 2 Wizard of Oz books, and those books are so based.
Yeah, the actual books. It's been a while since I read them, but
L. Frank Baum in the second book, we can just say was not a fan of feminism.
Yeah.
The villain of his second book was a young woman leading an uprising of women against men. It's so funny to read. Yeah.
If you've only ever watched the movie, you just have no idea.
Brendan Garvey, you're correct. It is Helium-3. Yes.
Nice. Actually, too, if you're looking at older books, if you just want to kind of listen in a car or something, Mark Stine does a really nice job. He takes all these old classic books and he narrates them, then I think you have to be a club member, but he has them all on his website. He actually does a very nice job at that. I know for a fact he's done a couple of these novels we mentioned. So
Brendan Mueller warns us to be wary of H.G. Wells. Yeah, that's the only book of his I'd probably read. I mean, if you really want to know about the War of the Worlds, just go watch one of the movie adaptations. They're going to be a lot less damaging than, although like I saw that they made a European War of the World that was very, very typically European woke. So, but go watch the movie instead of reading that book, because Wells was part of that group that Belloc and Chesterton were arguing against.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm pretty sure that in his book Heretics, he actually G. Wells explicitly.
Nice.
Let's see. Raymond says to me to H.G. Wells. Yeah, he would have. Let's see. So have you started writing the follow-up to your chat again here?
Still in the planning phases, honestly.
I imagine that those things take a lot of planning to do.
They do. And you can, the thing is, if you start out and you go too far in, and then you realize you really want to do something different, there's kind of that like, oh man, but I've written 4 chapters already. Like, do I want to start over? Or can I fix what I've got? And, if you do that, you tend to make a lot of continuity errors.
So when I wrote my master's thesis several years ago, I had to rewrite an entire chapter.
Yeah.
And I did it over the course of a weekend, and I was not happy to, it was needed. It's sort of like why my doctoral dissertation, the version that I defend, if I publicly defend it, the only people who will be able to find the people who know how to find it, because I've had to make so many changes that I'm almost embarrassed. Like, it doesn't even sound like people who listen to me. It doesn't even sound like me anymore in that thing. The copy that I'll give to the people, the supporters of what I do here, because I promised them, is going to be an earlier version, which will still have disclaimers, because I was trying to throw my committee a bone. Let me put it this way. I wrote in one of my chapters, I call out John Kerry and politicians like him for their support of medical Moloch worship, and like what the church says on that. And man, I got rang through the ringer during the revision phase for that, and I had to pull all that stuff out. It was just so disappointing.
Academia just can't. It's like you can't do anything the least bit controversial within academia. It all has completely in line with the current world zeitgeist, or you'll just be tossed out on your bum.
Right. I don't. Yeah. This is why a lot of the alarm bells people are raising right now over the current crisis and its effect on higher education. I'm just like, don't make me love the current crisis.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to say, I mean, obviously, more of the hard sciences, and I think the hard sciences were the last to be hit.
Oh, they're being hit now. There are people.
They are being hit, though. Yeah, they were starting to be hit even back when I was more in it. I mean, once you get in. If
you go watch the anti social justice content creators from like a year or two ago here on YouTube, you'll find videos from them talking about how engineering and math programs are now being undermined because they're they're being called patriarchal and oppressive.
So my first year of medical school, I did a research project and wrote a scientific paper, which I managed to get published. But I had an advisor who took issue with the fact that I was using the word gender to just refer to either male or female. I said, in terms of gender, X number were male and X number were female. And it was literally the first time I think I ever even heard the idea that you should be careful about how you use the term gender. And at the time, he was recommending I use the term sex. And I saw that, we stopped using the term gender in any kind of scientific literature, and he started using the term sex. And now they're even coming for sex.
They are. So well before anybody else heard about all this stuff that you hear now, it was announced, they said, cool, now our next thing is the ideology stuff. They choose to do whatever I want. Literally that day, the people in my office, this is the vanguard of all this stuff, is student leadership.
They know what they're doing.
I bet you that if you looked at the in the culture promoting this stuff, you will go find that they were all like student body presidents and other things at universities. And so when people say, "Oh, that stuff's a waste of time," why do people do it? I'm like, you don't understand where they get their training. And they have there's a Supreme Court case from the 19th century that guarantees that these organizations exist in the public universities. It's Yeah. So I got a question from Dominique asking, sorry for the broad question, but what are our thoughts on the Knights of Columbus? Specifically, would you suggest men join or not, and why? And that's a question for both. I'll say that I think that it depends on the chapter. The Knights of Columbus at the diocesan parish near me, they're good guys. What I know them from mostly are like fundraising barbecues, though. I know guys who are more connected to more, I would say, traditionally minded chapters than others.
So, just so there's no conflict of interest or anything, I am a 4th degree Knight of Columbus. I'm actually the Deputy Grand Knight for our local council. So, but we have a good council. And there are things that the broader organization does that I don't always agree with. But I do think it's still a good organization if your local council is made up of good guys trying to do good things.
So Hewling asks if
how I answer that question.
Yeah. Hewling asks if I would have had to do more rewriting if I'd gone to the University of Portland instead of where I went. Well, what I know of their theology program, yes. There are self-proclaimed liberation theologians on their program there. So let's see. Stream is becoming more and more intermittent. Yeah, again, this is peak hours. This is why I'm going to be looking to upgrade my my internet service here probably this coming week. I get Google ad paid this week. I'll cover. You ever notice it costs a lot of money to get new internet service? It's like, here's your first month, but then you got to pay for all this equipment. It's like, I mean, I can write it off of my taxes, but it's still annoying.
That's true. You actually have a pretty valid reason for that. That's
yeah. Well, here's the thing. My service provider here where I live, they wire whole neighborhoods up like you are in an office building. Which sounds great until you've got like a couple hundred of your neighbors watching Netflix or streaming World of Warcraft or whatever game is the big one online right now, and then you start having problems. Stupid question here. Are memes illegal in your novel, and what secret way have people for sharing them? If you mean memes like, clever pictures with edgy comments, I will say from reading it, I didn't see anything like that.
I don't think you could get... So I will say this. Another theme is surveillance.
Yeah, you couldn't get away with it in the surveillance state that you have in there.
Yeah. This is another... If you take what's going on now and just push it forward, so easy. The technology already basically exists to do what I kind of described in the novel. All you really need is sufficient to monitor and red flag, and that's basically what they're using in the novel. So everything a person is doing is basically being monitored, and flag it if anything comes up that's suspicious.
They're pretty much monitoring everybody in your book, except there are higher levels of more surveillance being given to people who actually matter than the non-party member in the street who's just either lives off of the universal income or goes to work every day, right? They're not like they're not watching that guy too closely, but
right. There's kind of the unwashed masses, which they'll allow a lot more to kind of just go on. Again, kind of like we were talking about earlier, if you allow a certain amount of freedom, you can keep the system going much more efficiently. But the more you want to climb within the system, the more you have to be willing to just have everything you do and say be monitored.
Yeah. Peter Jansen asks if there are European chapters of the Knights of Columbus. I actually don't know the answer to that question.
There are.
If you say there are, okay. Because I was going to say the person you could ask that would be Charles Coulomb, who is a degree Knight of Columbus, and he's presently in Austria working on his PhD.
Yeah, he's a good example, but also I can just say that if you join, they send you like a magazine that just has kind of events of what's going on in the Knights of Columbus as an organization as a whole. And they do occasionally talk about chapters in Europe, so I know they exist. I mean, that's about all I can really say for them, but they're out there.
Mr. Joy says, if things are getting bad, should we get armed? What's his name? He's one of the guys from the U.S. Grace Force podcast. He actually had an episode where he suggested that, and I noticed his channel got throttled the day after he put that video up. But I will say that my parish has an actual there who just happens to attend mass, and he just happens to stick around for the next mass just to provide security. Even though I'm in a state where I don't think people would try that. You know, I get the feeling that most people realize where I live, it'd be a terrible idea.
You know, that's mostly a deterrent against the random crazy trying to attack, or maybe if you reach to it, the popular mob coming after your church. Mm-hmm. It will do nothing against an organized state trying to cut things off.
Healing is giving me some tips on streaming equipment. Healing, if you want to send me an email with like what you recommend as a good router that would help me with with internet for like what I'm doing here, go ahead and send me an email with that, because as you might have guessed, I'm literate with technology. So let's see. Yeah, apparently there are no Knights of Columbus in Poland, although I'm pretty sure they've got their own like sort of group like that.
As I say, there's also other knightly orders out there.
Colin McMenamin says who I was talking about was Doug Barry. Yes, that's him. Yeah, his channel was exploding in growth, and then all of a sudden his views just dropped off the planet when I saw that video he did, and then I noticed it was just like a fraction of the views, and I know exactly what happened to him. And I'm hoping throttled at right around the same time. I'm hoping that he got unthrottled, but I don't know. Are we not living through a repeat of the Tower of Babel? Failed heaven. I mean, that's sort of like you could have called your book, New Babel or something, if you wanted to call it that. That's sort of what that reminds me of. Is we have all these wonderful, cheap, thrills and cheap distractions as a sort of materialist balm for our souls. But again, all we're doing is distracting ourselves. I know, because as a convert, I lived through that, and at the end of the day. Yeah, none of these things are, things add up to the experiences I had as a convert in the Novus Ordo, by the way, initially, the first few times I received communion. I just will say that.
And I do try to portray, like, for my character, and I think this is true for a lot of people, like, at first, those sorts of things, and they really do keep your attention and distract you, but the human soul isn't built to really be satisfied by that. And you just keep engaging in it. You see, it's like people who go to harder and harder forms of porn, right? I mean, we talk about these addictions.
So well documented too.
Yeah, it's like, well, this doesn't satisfy anymore, but it used to. So maybe if I go a little stronger, a little harder, eventually people just end up kind of burned out and nothing works anymore. And
then they get into the really, really even worse abusive stuff just because of that. So Valentinus asks you if you did research on the Soviet or the Middle Kingdom's use of censorship, propaganda, and the strange culture that comes out of it.
Mostly Soviet.
Mostly the Soviet, yeah. I mean, there are scenes in that book that take place in propaganda offices, so it's a theme there. If you're into that kind of stuff, it's a book worth reading. And if you have a Kindle Unlimited membership, which I've never had, because personally I can't really read books electronically unless it's on my computer screen and I'm at my desk. That's how I read your book, was on my But right. I actually probably will get getting a physical copy of it just because, well, I prefer physical copies of books. Yeah.
I mean, I ordered a bunch of them so that I have ones on hand myself, obviously, and I actually think. Again, I love the cover, and it's just neat to have it in a physical form. It printed out well.
So apparently there is an order calling itself the Order of Christ the King, but it's led by an apostate priest who's suspended. So
that's a shame.
So Olaf asks if there's anybody here, a Catholic, who wants to explain something to him. So go ahead and put it in the chat, Olaf. Although, I mean, if you're not a Catholic, be careful how you word it. My channel is a welcome place for non-believers and Protestants and Eastern Orthodox, but as soon as you try to lead people out of the church, you get the ban hammer comes on you instantly. But otherwise, there are Protestants and Orthodox and atheists who hang out and are just members of the community and being decent to each other. I don't care.
Yeah, they just have to know we're trying to convert them here. That's all.
Yeah. Just don't. Yeah. I just ask that if you're part of a weird movement, my channel's comments are not the place for that. That's it. That's all I say, And so you got people offering to have Olaf ask him things. So, okay, so what is your favorite dystopian novel?
Ooh.
Or work, dystopian work. That can include movies, too. Like, I remember initially liking V for... And now I find it ironic. Like, I want to go back and watch it knowing what I know about Guy Fawkes, because the main character in the movie is wearing a mask of a Catholic counter-revolutionary who was probably kind of crazy, who tried to overthrow his government, which would have been terrifying, would have probably been extremely counterproductive. And so watching all these guys wearing these Guy Fawkes masks, trying to be edgy atheist revolutionaries when they're really wearing the face on their face of a edgy Catholic, is just funny to me. So I kind of want to go back.
I guess, in terms of, actually, I would go more with almost like a universe. I quite enjoy the Warhammer verse. I find it really just fun. And
it is. I remember years and years and years ago, like right out of high school, I worked in a gaming store. So I got to know that universe pretty well, and I could never get into the game, but I really I found the lore fascinating.
Yeah, it's honestly like I like the game okay. I actually did more fantasy back in the day, and I don't have time for it anymore. But I've always enjoyed the literature, and actually the 40K literature than the fantasy literature.
I think that's because they put their resources into it, and because that's where their money is. Although if you watch some of the angry nerd commentators on YouTube, that the revolutionary forces in the culture have gotten their hands on 40K too, and they're trying to change things.
Oh yeah, of course, because that's just it. It's actually very woke in a lot of ways, and it's even very introspective. You have this atheistic dystopia critical of itself, basically.
Well, right. The humans in the future aren't technically humans. They're the descendants of a genetically engineered that rose up and wiped the people out. And so their average IQ is like 80 or something. And their so-called God Emperor is essentially a human being that's kept on eternal life psychic powers. And it's a very black vision of the future. He tried
to wipe out religion. And there's even a short story one of the authors wrote, I think it's called The Last Priest. And it's basically the emperor finding the last priest on Earth, and they basically have an extended conversation before the emperor kills. And the priest basically says, like, you kill me, you kill our religion, you think you're getting rid of religion, but all that's going to happen is they're going to turn you into a god, and they're going to worship you. And then that's exactly what eventually happens later on in the lore.
Right, and it's no wonder that, that eventually the forces of hell.
Yeah,
and it looks like, and from what I remember, it looks like humans aren't winning. So.
No, it's basically a fruitless battle. There's no possibility of victory. It's just staving off defeat as long as you can. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting universe. If you imagined a universe where God just left his creation to fend for itself and allowed the demons to physically manifest more, that's essentially kind of what it is. It's a very dark world, obviously, but makes for an interesting place to spend in any case.
That's an interesting choice for a favorite one.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good authors that write for it, so I think that helps. But.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that if you're reading popular fiction, a lot of the authors that you might like actually slog out these sort of borderline garbage tier novels set in Hollywood made fantasy and science fiction universes. So back years ago, before I converted, and when I was a major Star Wars guy, I had a bunch of Star Wars novels, and my favorite Star Wars writer was Timothy Zahn, and I found out the guy wrote a Terminator Salvation novel.
Yep.
And I read it and I realized it read like something he wrote in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He just pounded out 200 pages to get it to the publisher. And I remember, if you're ever in Portland, Oregon, Powell's Books is a store to go check out. Go check out Powell's Books. It's such a wonderful bookstore. Although the religion section is definitely wanting, but the gold room was the room where you could buy your fantasy and science fiction, and Warhammer 40K and Warhammer fantasy novels that are there. You'll see names that if you are familiar with fantasy, science fiction, and mystery writers, you're going to see their names on those books.
Yeah,
these are the working writers, the people probably who had the choice of either having a day job or just writing dreck to pay their bills, and they chose to write garbage, basically.
Once in a while, they actually put a little bit of their skill into it too. That's all I'm saying. Is
I can defend some of the Star Wars novels that were published before Disney, just because some of them were actually fairly inventive, but most of them,
Well, and I'll say this for the 40K universe as well. I love how they solved the teleporter problem with Star Trek. I love when people point out with Star Trek that basically what they're doing, they're not actually teleporting you, they're just killing you and then somewhere else.
Yeah, people don't realize that. That's what Captain Kirk has been killed and essentially copied countless times.
Yeah. I mean, they literally just break you apart into little molecules, and then for whatever reason, they're apparently shipping those molecules somewhere to reassemble them. But like, why you think that would still be you at that point, I don't know.
You know what my favorite Star Trek was, aesthetically at least?
What's that?
Enterprise. You know why? Because I absolutely love NASA-style uniforms and the interior of their ship that looked like a ship. Steel rivets and recognizably a vessel.
Right.
I love that Earth culture was still recognizable.
Yeah.
And there was I remember one scene where the guy who played RoboCop was some venture capitalist trying to do some moon or something, and here it is again. People want to do crazy things with the moon as a science fiction plot line, but and I didn't remember what the plot of it was, but I even as bad as that show was, if you like science fiction at all, their Mirror Universe episodes are so for Enterprise good. That you get a glimpse into the world of what these authoritarians would get if they had their way by watching that Mirror Universe episode.
Well, just to finish my original thought, what I love with 40K is the way they do teleportation. It's the same way they do faster than light travel. They just rip a hole in reality, surround their vessel with somehow a little field that apparently maintains a buffer of reality around the ship, and then they just travel through hell, basically.
Yeah.
Just hell's connected to all the universe, and they just come out another side somewhere else. And that's how you do teleportation too. You just very short jump through hell back into reality.
Yeah.
Well, that at least explains how your body and soul stay together and get somewhere.
Right. I'm trying to think what I said that V for Vendetta was probably one of my favorites in terms of it's believable. I could see the current situation in the United States deteriorating to the point where all that stuff is going on. And the one thing, looking back on that movie, that I always wanted to ask and find out is how much of what UK is going on in the US is actually happening in the US, and how much of it's just a product of their propaganda ministers.
Yeah.
Because if you've never watched that movie at least, they keep referring to the former United States because it's descended into a civil war, and they never tell you what it's about.
Yeah.
But there's a one point their Bill O'Reilly ripoff guy is on TV talking about how a ship from the former United States has shown up filled to the brim with wheat and corn. Became that people go there and pay them back for a little tea party that was thrown in Boston Harbor because they're trying to trade the foodstuffs for medical supplies. Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's almost believable what could happen.
Yeah. I guess going back to that question too, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's probably one of the ones that stuck with me. I read The Giver basically as a kid still. And
what's The Giver about? I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that one.
Okay, yeah. That one, it takes place in a future where you have this very kind of, at first idyllic. It takes place through the eyes of a child who basically reaching adolescence, and they're introducing him to his future job. And all the other kids of the same grade are also being introduced into, okay, here's what you're actually going to do as an adult. And so they start to actually learn more about this world that they've grown up in. And he gets chosen to be what's called the receiver. And it's kind of weird, but basically you have a giver and a receiver, and they're actually the people who have the memory of the former world. And so he actually gets to find out what the world used to be like. And so as he's going through this, it's getting contrasted with you also learning about the world he's in. And it's a very gray, controlled world. It's actually a little bit, they give people medications that kind of help control their emotions, that take away their sex drive.
I believe that was the part of the plot of Dark City too, wasn't it? Or was the one that had who was it? I'm trying to remember. It was a science fiction novel where movie didn't get wasn't as successful as it could have been. But everything is controlled, emotions are monitored, and everyone is given medicine to keep them from being emotional. There's a news broadcast where there are rebels who broke it, who have spirited away the Mona Lisa and other art because art's banned, music is banned, everything. It's a recurring trope.
Right. one of the interesting things with this one is actually as he starts to become a receiver and he receives instructions of what he can do, he's basically not able to tell other people about it. And he's told specifically that he can lie. And it gives him kind of the first realization because he thinks about, well, if I can lie, who else can lie? Who else is allowed to lie, right?
Right.
But ultimately, that novel is, he starts to kind of realize that his society is an evil society. Mm-hmm. And talks to the giver who basically it is, we've never known what to do about it. And we're afraid of the bad things that used to be in life before we had all this. But the thing that really gets the character to decide we need to rebel against this, we need to do something to change the world we're in, is he finds out that when they have babies that they don't want, there's something wrong with the baby, or it's just an unexpected, they don't want that population, they just euthanize the baby. And he actually sees this and he realizes they've been using this euphemism their whole time, retired, or something happens, they do something wrong and they get retired. And he realizes they're just killing them. It's just instant death penalty, basically, if you're just not wanted by society. And that realization causes him to basically completely go rogue. So it's a very pro-life message, actually. It just shows that for a state to maintain that kind of control, ultimately they're going to use something like euthanasia. And
so if you're just joining us, I'm here having a conversation with Jacob Clearfield, the author of Anno Domini 2064, which is the first book in the Golden Republic series, which is sort of a overtly Catholic dystopian science fiction novel. And I say sort of because, the science fiction, strictly speaking, the science plays kind of a key role in the storytelling. And yours, technology and that kind of thing is pretty, required, but things that we have now anyway.
Yeah.
I was reading your book when VR plays an important part in his book, we'll say, and I was reading your book while then going to my side job, where people were talking about how they, were going to use their Trump bucks to go buy themselves a VR headset. And I was just sitting there going, just telling them, don't do anything gross with it, please.
I'll admit, while writing this book, I did buy a VR headset just to sort of experience where it's at right now. Yeah.
Well, that's search for your book, right? But So Peter Jansen asks in the chat, wasn't the biggest letdown in the Next Generation and its follow-ups was the creepy, rigid intellectual hierarchy where smart equals morally good, no deviation allowed to that dogma? Yeah, pretty much. I think a lot of people's, I almost wonder how much today we see people just accepting experts is a product of Hollywood. Telling people, hey, you've got, if you're an expert, you're you're worth listening to. And it's like, well, hold on, And someone says the movie, Peter also says, how about the atheistic monastic rule of equilibrium starring Christian Bale as a dystopia? That's the movie I was talking about, is Equilibrium, which is the one where
patients who've had a stroke say who they understand everything you say, but they can't produce speech to answer you.
So saying they can see the chat, but they say the audio is silent, and I can definitely tell it must be the case because we went from about 120 people watching to 24 watching and dropping
Okay.
So yeah, I probably should just call it here because right now the current stream rate is lower than the recommended that we use a bitstream. Let me see if I can fix it. Let's see, viewer activity, analytics, streams. Can I click on low latency? On list live replay when stream ends, close captions. It won't let me drop the latency is the problem.
Okay.
Which is unfortunately, I'm getting errors and warnings in my own thing here. I don't know why this keeps happening to me. We're not talking about our books and movies here. So I really doubt there's somebody, how
the brain works.
Well, hey, it looks like I'm fine now. 39 watching now, yeah, because I'm not getting the eternal loop here. Can you guys actually hear me now? I'm watching the chat. Try refreshing my VPN. I don't have a VPN. I'd get a VPN. I might have been offered, I keep getting emails from marketing companies saying, hey, we like your channel and your content. Very email. Would you like to, pitch our weird product that I've never heard of? And I never answer them because, frankly, I would only do that with things that I think people would be good with. People said they can hear us now. Good. And now we're climbing back up to 50 odd people watching.
Oh, okay.
Very good. Thank you to those who hung out. Because I can still see that we're lagging a little bit, but we're going to soldier on for a little while longer. Restaurants in my state have reopened, and I'm going to try to take for the first time in about 2 months. Basic husbanding 101, right? So we're not going to go any place super fancy or anything, but we're going to, there's a family-run barbecue place, a 5-minute drive from my house, and I absolutely love that place. I've been in Oklahoma for almost 100 years now. I'm looking forward to their 100th anniversary, assuming our elites don't decide to fulfill Catholic prophecy of their own volition, with getting the war that they seem to be itching for. With the
well, I will say I'm a little jealous. I'm still in an area of the country where we're very much still a hot spot. In fact, this morning I was on one of the COVID floors, and I can tell you, in a place where it's still very much spreading, and working on a floor where we're getting reports of employees now actually catching it as well. So nurses are getting sick. I haven't heard of any of the other doctors who've gotten sick.
Are you? Like I may go to the diocese. I may go to a diocesan daily mass here in a couple. I don't know.
The problem is
so Jacob, somebody in the chat asks what state you're in.
I'll just say it's in Wisconsin. Actually, I based the book to take place there partly because it was a place that I would be very familiar with, and I could have locations that I've often been to, and I can for the future.
Well, people who've read Stephen King always wonder why he writes so much about Maine. Well, write what you know when it comes to land. Like I found it remarkable that Jim Butcher, probably one of the biggest urban fantasy novelists, he writes all of his books, at least the last time I read him, which was a long time ago, because I don't really make time for that kind of stuff anymore. But he said he doesn't. He's never been to Chicago, but he sets his books there.
Oh wow!
And I'm like, that takes a lot of legwork to make it believable.
Yeah, it really does. Frankly, I just found it a lot easier to put it in a place where I've been to those places, and I can just, from memory, recall what they look like. And then if I want to make changes based on what's happened in the future, it's very easy to just make those changes. But
I'm seeing people in the chat say they need a haircut. Well, you could do what a coworker of mine did at my side job. He cue-balled his head. And then, the best part about it, and literally the next day, the governor gets on television and says that they're going to reopen the state like the next day, begin for phase 1. And he laughed. He thought it was the funniest thing. Timing for it was perfect. I didn't get my hair cut until about 3 or 4 days into, or actually halfway through phase 1 reopening, because I just didn't want to deal with the local corporate haircutting place.
Yeah.
My town, where the town I live in is weird, right? It's a typical Midwest town that's been around a while. Half of town is old-timey, settler-looking, empty storefronts from when Walmart moved in, and then the other half are the corporate places that sprang up when Walmart moved in. Yeah. It's very typical Midwest. Like, I'm guessing you've got places like that in Wisconsin too, don't you?
Oh, for sure.
Dominique says his diocese created a task force, so probably won't be open for mass soon. Yeah, that's like, you think, like, I bring a different sort of perspective to Catholic commentary in that my PhD and my training is in political science and public administration, so I recognize bureaucratic, and if you want to talk about anything that is about as antithetical to Christianity that isn't like obviously evil, it's bureaucratic thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's not like, the bureaucrats aren't doing rituals in the streets or whatever, or, but
I'll give you a good example. So we adopted my son, and they did not want to let us baptize him until we had gone through the full formal adoption, which in Wisconsin takes usually about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And like literally, I did go to the chancery and I fought it, and I actually got them to overturn it. But honestly, about the only reason that they were willing to overturn it was because the birth mother had also been Catholic and wanted him to be baptized as well. And like, then they were okay with it. But it's like, the year actually has signed at that point her rights away. She's never going to be the mother.
It's almost
right?
like divine intervention that a Catholic child is adopted by a Catholic family.
Yeah.
Right. But you know what it is? They want to avoid that scandal from, I think, involving Pius XII or whichever pious pope it was. That big
the
scandal.
Jewish kid whose nursemaid got him baptized, and
right.
Yeah.
Like, want to have more children, and we have a healthy Catholic marriage, so God willing, it'll happen. But at some point, we're probably going to hit that place where we're going to be that older Catholic parents who too old to probably have children anymore themselves are going to are faced with, which is, should we adopt?
Yeah,
because there isn't exactly a shortage of children praying and begging for adoption out there.
I was going to say, so we're trying again now. So we have our son, he's almost 3. We were able to re-enter the pool after a year. So it's been almost 2 years of waiting again. And I will say we're finding that if you already have a lot of the birth moms just don't want to look at you, which I kind of understand because you feel bad for the people who don't have any kids yet. And so I understand why they would child go to some people who are waiting for their first, but it's hard. Like if you're trying to adopt, you can't count family.
Right.
And so it's sort of funny. You go to the traditional parish and you've got your one kid and you're in your mid 30s and you kind of wonder what everybody do because, like, why don't you have 5 kids yet?
I'm 40 and we have one child, but my wife and I got married pretty late. Like I was 37 when we got married. So if anybody gives me any garbage about it, like we've been married 3 years and we spent the first few months of our marriage not even living in the same state because I moved cross country and my wife was trying to so, give me a break. My health has been pretty rough the last year. But a lot of people don't get that, and they make bad assumptions, and they do it because most Catholics know that family who are using NFP inappropriately. And
heck, I mean, in the Novus Ordo, you'll just assume you're contracepting. Sadly enough, at a traditional Latin mass, probably most people are assuming you're better than that. But you're absolutely right. They'll still assume you're up to something kind of shady. It's like, look, if we could have kids naturally, we would love to have kids naturally. It would be a heck of a lot easier and certainly a lot less expensive at that. But
Justin Reed is checking in from fascist Michigan, as he says it. God bless anyone who adopts. Yeah, it's definitely like an interesting cross to voluntarily pick up too. I almost wonder if that's like a specialization of the marriage vocation, to become like the adopting parent. It is its own, it's one of those things because it's funny. Like when you have a kid, you can't imagine your life without him anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Having Tommy, my son, it's like, well, how could I imagine life without him now? So if this is how God wanted it, my son, praise be to God that I'm here now and I have him, right? So yes, in some ways you can say that adoption is it's a tough road and there's a lot of special challenges that come with it. But then at the same time, I'm so happy to be the parent that I am with the child that I have. So how could I ever feel bad about it at the same, you know what I mean? Yeah, Clayton Lee says in the chat, he's a member of the channel, he says he was 45 when he got married and they have 3 children and now he's 68 years old. So, I haven't, lost any hope. It's just part of our problem is that it's just, if you've been subscribing, you would have known every other month, all of a sudden people were wondering if it was the same person talking to them because my voice was gone. I was just getting sick over and over and over again. And I either didn't get the thing going around or I was one of the people who had no symptoms. Either way. So go figure. And it's why every time I'd get sick, which is counterintuitive, but that's what happened to me consistently every single time. And I gained a bunch of weight during the 6 or 8 weeks that we were locked down here because my gym was closed. And I was having a conversation earlier today with my next door neighbor, right? He was like, I was kind of laughing about the fact that they closed gyms because who gets sick the least? People who go to the gym a lot. They're the people who get sick the least. I know this because when my nutrition and my health were on point and I was going to the gym 4.5, 5 days a week,
sure,
I didn't even get a cold for 2 years. It was great. Yeah. People are like, it's you're running the risk of sort of the vanity based idea. You can. That wasn't me. I don't think that was me. I wasn't taking many pictures in the mirror of how awesome how cut I was looking. But man, it was great. I'm gonna get back to that place where I'm not getting sick like that. And that's when I lose enough weight, I'll probably go on camera more often. Like I don't do it now, so going on once would be more. Going on at least once in a while. Speaking of that, I am working on changing some of the visuals on my channel and trying to improve the visual quality too. So hang in there, folks. That's coming too. Let's see. Colin says he works with a guy who he and his wife had a child with Down syndrome. Amazing was they adopted another Down syndrome child. Wow. God bless them. God bless them for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kimberly Tancred says we should expect more births or 8 or 9 months. You know, there are going to be those kids who are going to be called the affliction generation, basically, right? So, because there's going to be a big baby boom coming.
You know,
Valentinus reminds me not to skip leg day. I'm waiting to hit leg day in a serious way until after I burn off my my quarantine weight, and I've lost half my quarantine weight already in the first week and a half. It's probably going to take me 2 to 3 weeks at the rate I'm going to burn off enough of it for me to feel comfortable. Not hopping onto the leg press machine. Like, tomorrow is typically leg day for me. Monday is. I'll probably hop on the leg press, but like, got a lot of extra weight. You can hurt yourself. So, like, because people don't realize when you're squatting, what you are squatting is everything from the waist up, in addition to whatever weight you're doing. People don't realize that. Like, I actually can talk about physical fitness almost enough to, let's put it this way, I know enough about it that I actually considered going and taking one of the better online programs, a certification to be a personal trainer. Years ago, I considered it. I'm glad I didn't now, because nobody would want to get work from a guy like me.
Could always make it your second channel, though. They'd probably not demonetize you on that one.
Well, I'm actually considering a channel that would have sort of trad skills, you know? So, for instance, I'm thinking of I got the idea when I was at a sporting goods store recently, and they had an old-timey cast iron with a hand crank meat grinder. And I thought about that going, man, I'm sure there's content online already for this, but, like, how do you make 96% lean ground beef? Though I'm sure there are ways like tutorials online how to do it, but a lot of people would watch that. A lot of people would watch how to grow tomatoes. You know, I'm not the guy for that. My tomatoes, I bought beefsteak heirloom tomatoes planters, and they came up as beefsteak heirloom cherry tomatoes. I was very, you know, these are the days where people should learn this stuff.
There's a book called Wildwood Wisdom by Ellsworth Jaeger. You could have a YouTube channel just going through that book and doing the stuff that it describes, you know.
I bought a book on some, like, I don't want to call it survival kind of those kind of skills. I bought a book on that's on its way. What was that book though?
Wildwood Wisdom.
Okay, I'm gonna go look.
Older books,
which means you can find it for cheap.
But yeah. But it does a good job of illustrating things and just very much point by point describing them. But you can tell it's stuff that really comes out of, I think, like the late 1890s and was just being preserved at that point.
So you've got copies of this book going for $35 and $70. There's a hardcover version for $375.
Wait, really?
Yeah, on Amazon, on or as I call it, you know, Bezos World. You know, like super expensive. But
when I bought it, it was not that expensive. But sorry.
No worries. Let's see. What time did the stream start is what Electropup is asking. We started at 2, and then we lagged out pretty badly for about 5 or 6 minutes, but we kept going through it. Let's hope there's a baby boom. Yeah.
I did read an article saying that there's pretty good evidence we won't really see a baby boom.
I expect unless what the Supremes have hinted at recently it comes to pass, you're not going to. Like, put it this way, the meltdown on lefty Twitter was so rich when the controversial newest member of the court used as an example of an unjust, badly passed law or badly passed court decision. Their tears, I could have started a salt mine and just made a small fortune.
Well,
have I done the prisoner workout? No, I have not done the prisoner workout. I was dumb and spent half my quarantine not doing anything like that except mowing my lawn. Up and just did a 1 mile each direction walk early in the morning after producing content. I realized that my weight gain during the lockdown was a lot worse than I thought because and when I lived in Portland, I was a pedestrian. I'd walk 3 miles, 5 miles in each direction somewhere if I had the time. You know, I didn't drive in Portland. Now it's just like, you know. Peter Jansen says his traditional skills professional fool or village idiot. Well, you might be smarter than you think. A lot of people are talking about how, like, you know, sperm counts are going down and things because of GMOs and plastics in the water. I'll tell you, like, I sound like almost an environmental nut when I start talking about how dangerous the plastics in the water are. Seriously, that worries me. Like, you can take blood samples of people and find plastics in like 99% of the world's population's blood. It's a real thing. It's why. I'm not policy. I just don't want it to be stupid.
Yeah, it's crazy. It really is crazy that that's not talked about and that there isn't more of a real scientific effort to investigate that because, I mean, there's only so much redundancy built in. Our bodies are really good about having a lot of redundancy. You know, the average way more than enough sperm count. But if you get to a point where the averages are low enough, you're going to have a lot of infertility out there.
I almost wonder if that's that's the plot line of the movie Children of Men. I've never watched it because it always, what I could tell it was about struck me as being borderline blasphemous, but
yeah,
that's why I didn't watch it. But
yeah,
but you know, you've got a world population that can't figure out why all of a sudden everyone is sterile, and it's just causing societal breakdown. And then all of a sudden, a woman, like an African woman, randomly gets pregnant, and I mean not randomly, but she gets pregnant, and the plot line is keeping her away from the angry hordes who've sort of adopted a slow apocalypse.
It does make me think of my college biology class. I had a professor who said, he challenged us with this idea. He said, any given a long enough period of time will go extinct. Even if there were no predators and an infinite amount of food and like there's nothing constraining the population whatsoever, eventually that species will go extinct. And he asked us why. And it took me I got it pretty quickly. No one else thought of it at the time, but it makes sense. The reason you will eventually have a species go extinct is just eventually you'll have a generation where everyone's infertile. Like if you go to infinity, eventually that will happen, and then the species will just end. Mm-hmm. So
that's the thinking anyway. We know that mankind will go extinct, but that's not because there's going to be a bunch afterwards, but because God, Christ comes back in His glory and all that, and the rest. But it's why I tell people don't get black-pilled. We know how the story ends. You just got to persevere. I do in the book explore a little bit though. I do think the entropy of the universe is meant to assign that God exists. The first time where in a class they explained the concept of entropy and the fact that physics, every reaction that takes place creates greater entropy. Mm-hmm. I just sat there, I was like kind of blown away because I was like, that's basically your scientific God. Right.
And it's kind of amazing. I think if more people understood that, you'd have hardly any atheists out there because scientifically the universe is not self-sustaining. It could not possibly have existed for eternity, or we would not have a universe that can change the way it does.
I think it's fascinating that as society becomes more atheistic, either overtly or believers live as atheists, the more chaotic our culture becomes, and the more things begin to break down. I remember a time when the secular left used to at least pay elected officials did to God.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody remember the famous Obama speech from 2004 at the Democratic Convention where he talked about we believe in an awesome God? I remember that. Do I believe him in hindsight? That's a different story. But now they won't even do it. It's interesting how quickly things have just degenerated.
I mean, was that 2012 that they did that?
That was 2004 at the Democratic Convention, which I almost am curious if the convention's going to be like. Oh, they removed God from I think that might have been 2012 or 2016. I remember them doing that in 2016, but they might have done it in 2012. By 2012, I wasn't paying much attention to politics. I was working more on my soul, basically trying to figure out my plays.
Yeah.
It was just I didn't care. So, but Obama was a very big part of my disenchantment with politics as a solution. It's why I have a nuanced take on the current president, because I'm just not going to jump on political bandwagons anymore. Been there, done that, never going to do it again.
Politics won't.
No, it won't. Although I'm a firm believer that correct political choices will buy us time, but that's buying time is different.
Well, there have been ages where politics weren't that bad, and sometimes politics even supported the state and created a more just society. So, I mean, it can be worthwhile for Christians to be involved in it. I'm not saying that they're not, but
see me next Saturday. I have a papal encyclical I've been waiting to record because it wasn't as long as I remembered it being, but it was longer than what I've been doing lately. But it's Leo XIII's encyclical on Christians' political culture, so Immortale Dei, which is an underrated encyclical by far. And if you ever have questions about what should Catholics be doing, and you want to hear it from an anti-modernist pope, Leo the 13th's got you covered. He wrote 88 encyclicals and countless papal letters. He's written about just about everything. So,
just, I will say, I don't know how some of those guys did it. Like, you're sitting there in charge of the Catholic Church, and these brilliant men sitting there writing encyclical after encyclical after encyclical, and they're great. I mean, you read through them, just so much.
They're so rich, yeah. Well, you know how they do it, right? They work with, they have ghostwriters.
They do. I mean, obviously, they have a ton of people working under them.
So my favorite error that I hear, even from some of the people in our own circles, is that there's no such thing as social justice, and that social justice is against what the church teaches. The term social justice was coined by the Catholic Church. It was coined by the likely ghostwriter for Leo the 13th's most famous encyclical. People don't know that. And I actually read some of the things that guy wrote, and his concept of social justice has been inverted and turned on its head completely in the secular world. So if you say secular notions of social correct, I'll say you are mostly right. But like he coined the term to defend the rights of the aristocracy at a time when Italy was dealing with a Marxist sub. Right. Does that sound like social justice today? No. But, so.
I mean, that's the
game of wealth idea from the church, but the church didn't say redistribute wealth. It just, Christian charity it and give all the power to the state instead of expecting you to do it yourself or to do it through the church.
Well, frankly, you look at the forces of darkness, how they tend to operate. It often works much better for them if they take a little bit of truth and mix it in with their lies. If you take something that's good and noble and pure and to co-opt it to your ends so that it still appears pleasant to the people you're trying to convince.
So Teresa Nelson says she doesn't understand why popes have ghostwriters. The church takes a lot of time. And frankly, a lot of these guys couldn't write to save their life. Let me give you an example. I mean, it's not a really good example, but Caridia Amazonia. I read that for this channel because people were hearing all sorts of things being said about it, and I wanted people to hear it for themselves, because if they heard it for themselves, they'd hear what the real focus of the document was, and it wasn't what people were saying. Right. And it's filled with terrible poetry. And I kind of cracked a joke saying, or Pope Francis is bad poetry, but it wasn't his poetry. That stuff was like 70s liberation theologian bad poetry. I cannot emphasize enough how bad the poetry was.
The thing is, what the popes do control is writing it, and ultimately they have final say on it. They sign off on it. So if you have a pope who's a good pope who wants to teach in a pure manner, they're going to have really good priests and theologians writing their encyclicals, and they'll sign off on that.
So Healing says in the that I was right about the Blessed Mother having birth pains in Chosen, which is listed as a heresy at some point in the history of the church. Yeah, that's why I avoided it. Once I heard about, because it wasn't just Chosen they did that. I think they also did, I don't know if that was in Jesus of Nazareth or maybe it's the Nativity movie. It's one of the more recent ones.
Okay.
As for who was Leo the 13th's ghostwriter, I believe it was, for at least for Rerum Novarum, I'm pretty sure it was a monk by the name of Luigi Tapparelli. They were, I believe, in seminary together. I've got an article on him that I use as research for my dissertation, and I was a little surprised to see that, but that was when I realized, I mean, apparently the person who penned a lot of John Paul II's encyclicals was then Cardinal Ratzinger.
Right.
So that's why, like, if you read that, and then you read some of his encyclicals, and you read like some of Ratzinger's books that he wrote when he was Pope, his Jesus series. I think you can see a lot of the same sort of like linguistic dynamics there.
I still think it's fairly impressive, though, that especially when you have popes with lots of encyclicals coming out, because even if they're not personally writing them, it still requires a fair bit of effort on their part to be putting those out. I just can't imagine, when you think about all the duties of a pope, to have that kind of on top of it. It just shows you how dedicated some of those men really were.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would love to find out who wrote Pascendi for Pius X, or if he wrote it himself. Like, I keep having this dream that we're, the Pius XIII scenario where they scheme to get a pope elected who they think is a moderate, but he turns out to be like this super closet rad trad who commissions a papal encyclical to be written on some moderate thing, and secretly he's helping write a papal encyclical that modernism, complete with infallible ex-cathedra statements, and just to drop as a nuclear bomb on like the modernists.
What would almost be even better, and I wish I remember the name. There's kind of a U.S. president who was like this, who was like super corrupt almost his entire political career, and then when he actually president, it's like he just had this total 180, and he just cracked down on corruption, and he knew the game so well. He knew exactly who to go after. Yeah. But couldn't you just imagine like the modernist cardinal who actually has that, red pilling or true conversion, maybe.
Well,
maybe.
according to Catholic prophecy, one of my Marie-Julie Jeheny videos, and almost no one picked up on this in this video, that she had like one of her prophecies, one of her visions was of a pope who has a radical change of heart, and at a council demands the bishops stop preaching error, and they teach and then the bishops rebel against him and say, we don't have to listen to you.
Yeah.
Now, under that scenario, think about this. It'd be horrifying to watch, but at that scenario, all those bishops at that point basically excommunicate themselves.
Right. It would actually clarify this really well.
It would, and it would also consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart, a heck of a lot easier to pull off. All it would take at that point is the Pope and, let's say it happened. For the sake, imagine that it's Francis, right?
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, he just has a complete change of heart, 180, and he says, we're going to do the consecration. And they all say no. Well, we already know the names of the cardinals and bishops who would say, sure. It's all the ones that I keep reading the written document statements from, then a handful of the others that that we mentioned, the samples and the Stricklands and things.
Yep.
And that would be it. Unfortunately, I don't want to laugh about it because I'm just reminded right now of the Pius X had two prophecies. It sounds suspiciously like the released Fatima Third Secret of Fatima. A successor of his walking over the corpses of cardinals and bishops. But he also had another brief one where he said he saw the Russians at Genoa. Yeah, that's a little creepy. He had that one in 2014. If you ever want to go look that up, but
that one. I heard the other one, but I hadn't heard the one with.
I only know about that because I was watching Mike Church's interview with the author of Signs and Wonders, and they were talking about Catholic prophecy, and I was trying to find that book on the Founders Trading Post website, but I couldn't find it, and I need to send a tweet to Mike Church and be like, hey, King Dude, where do I get this book? I can't find it on your website. I want to give you money for this book. So a lot of comments here in the chat. Let's see. Chesterton's poetry is quite good. Yes, and I would read it from my channel, but you don't want me butchering his poetry. I already did a bad enough job with his thing that I did right around Halloween. Visa wouldn't let the Vatican Museum accept payments during B16. Yeah, there's some things about this. Somebody asked me if I think if he was forced out basically because of corruption. All I could do is speculate. I don't really know what it was. The only thing that I know is anybody could prove that he was forced out would be if you can get basically State Department documents or MI6 documents. You would need proof. This is why I don't ever touch the subject. It's because I can't make that kind of decision without hard proof. And but anybody will probably start filling up the chat with things that are anecdotal evidence. But no. You need proof, physical proof that could stand up in a courtroom. This is like the bar you have to have because it's such a serious matter. And I know how to do it, but at the same time, if I start digging there, I'll probably have a car accident. You know what I mean? So I'm not even joking.
Yeah, there was so much going on at the time, and you think about who was in charge of the Lovers of the World at the time. If it did happen, it's very unlikely anybody's going to be able to dig that up now. Without somebody coming after them, at least.
Priscilla says hello from Brazil. Hello in Brazil. Hang in there, please. Russians at Genoa. Doctor Who asks, well, again, to get back to your book, because I can definitely tell these kind of prophecies are playing a role in your story as they are observing what's going on. In your book, Europe looks like it's on the verge of war. And the Russians are one of the major players. Catholic prophecy makes it pretty clear. Like, go back and watch Doctor Who. Go watch my videos on Alois Erlmeyer's prophecies. He said that he had visions of the Russians cutting a swath from Russia east into Germany.
Because you think about Russia spreading her errors throughout the world. I mean, we're living that right now.
Right. It doesn't even happen anymore.
Right. I mean, is it Russia, or is it what Russia stood for at the time those prophecies were being made?
I think it's what Russia stood for. Bell was doing the work for it. Like, one of the things people don't realize is that people, I think, get this idea that they were targeting the church in the United States, but liberation theology in America at the same time that Bella Dodd was doing her thing in the United States.
Oh yeah, it was worldwide. They envisioned global revolution and global. So yes, America was one of the main antagonists that they needed to overcome, but it's not like they were only focusing efforts there. I'm trying to remember one video of the ex-KGB agent in the 80s who really, or actually no, it was early 90s, where we talked about how like 80% of the KGB's budget was not, spy games and, sitting there trying to record each other and figure out what military movements were going on. That it was really about logic change and corrupting peoples away from Western values, and particularly away from Christianity, to sort of set the stage for those sort of soft revolutions that would cause global communism.
So Blue Sky says hello from the Emerald Isle. I'll say hello back and hang in there. Hang in there. Julio says, if I have proof about the Clintons' corruption, I better go live in a bunker. Yeah, if you ever hear me say unironically that I have information that'll lead to the arrest of fill in the blank, send a donation to my wife. She'll probably need it. It's going to be an invasion of Russia, in your opinion. That's going to literally happen. An invasion of Russia. That's interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, in my book, I actually envision more an Islamization of and Christianity actually kind of holding out in Eastern Europe, although obviously it's a mix of Catholicism and more Eastern Orthodox. With America going much more secular, ultimately. Just because there's not as much of an Islamic presence or other, you could make it something else filling the gap. But I kind of see Western Europe without a strong church eventually becoming much more Islamic if the current trends were to continue. So I kind of explore that angle more in the book. But that obviously will set them up for a natural antagonism with Eastern Europe, Russia, and then the U.S. as a more secular force. So that's kind of the setup at the beginning of the book, essentially.
Right.
Of course, the powers that be in what was the United States won't even address Christianity by name because they're trying to eliminate the memory of it, essentially. They just refer to it, I think, as a primitive religion, basically.
Right, and like they had almost completely forgotten about it anyway because they actually had to bring an expert in that one scene to really figure out what was going on.
Within the party are just like not really familiar with it, so. I mean, it doesn't take long when you think about it to shoot something down a memory hole. It's really only a generation or two to wipe something out from most people's memory.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about like the Latin Mass, right? Like I think that's one of the things that some of the people who are the strongest opponents of the traditional Latin Mass, why they have such a visceral reaction, because they had the public consciousness for almost 50 years before all of a sudden it just inexplicably started becoming popular again and interest started coming.
I grew up as a cradle Catholic. There was no Latin Mass growing up, and it was sort of, you vaguely heard that once upon a time they did the Mass in a different language, and you kind of hear it was sort of hard on people because they didn't understand what was going on. But,
which is a total just slamming of the people and their faith of those times, because they knew what was going on.
Totally.
The peasants in the Middle Ages knew what was going on, even if they didn't speak much Latin other than the responses at Mass.
I mean, as a child, though, I learned that it was a good thing that the church had moved into the modern world and had let everybody use their own language. And I didn't even know communion on the tongue was a thing. I just was taught that you received in the hand. That was just what you did. That's how you were taught when you were in Catholic school. No understanding of what that meant or just how grave an offense that used to be in the church, right?
Yeah. So I got a question from CFI that I listened to EMJ. Is he a true scholar or is he a crank? He's a scholar. I don't agree with all of his takes about certain things like Malachi Martin and a couple other things, but he's a scholar in his work, even though like some of it is so controversial that I can't even probably even mention him by name. He's just, and some of the work he does is the bitterest sort of, horse-sized red pill for people to swallow is his main thing that gets him in trouble. But he's a scholar, and I mean, is he kind of a crank? I mean, what do you mean by crank? I mean, he's not a. He's the kind of guy who I think stopped caring what people think.
Yeah.
And people like that after a while tend to come off as a crank.
Here's the funny thing: when a society really starts to go off the rails, it's the people on the extremes who don't about what society thinks of them, who are still capable of looking at society and seeing it as going wrong. I mean, if you want to fit into a society, you have to kind of go along with where the flow's taking you, right?
This is why anybody who follows me on Twitter or on my personal Facebook sees me posting memes making fun of the Republican Party as much as I do. Because like I shared one yesterday on Twitter. It was, 2040s Republican, and it was basically your purple-haired person today.
But it does give you a problem, because if you are one of the people outside of society saying, this is really messed up, we have to change society, but you have to be comfortable with being rejected by society as it is. You're also in with a lot of people, because let's face it, even when society's healthy, there are always kind of some cranks out at the extremes who are just kind of a little crazy. And now you're outside of society, and so are those people who are all society, and society has a really hard time separating you out from just the usual kind of kooks that are out there too.
Right.
And I'm not trying to offend anybody. I assume most of the people here are probably sensible people who understand that our society has real problems. It's just that to the society, they just very easily can dismiss us as the kooks that are usually going to be out there.
Yeah, Charlie in the chat said he tried to share a link in the chat about St. Peter's lightning, but the chat won't let him. Like, if anybody wonders, like, if they're trying to share links on my channel, in the comments, those get filtered out, and reasons. One, because I partially authorize YouTube to do that, because I catch porn links shared in the chat or shared in the in time. That's part of it, and also people like anti-Catholic apologetics get filtered out that way. However, if you want to share something, I usually try to go and look and see if it's fun. I always do it, but if you're trying to do it in the live chat, break the link. It works. I saw that recommendation from someone, and that's you should do that. Electropup said that. Let's see. Yeah, there was that in Ireland, that story of the priest letting the Saracen have their prayer meeting in their in their parish chapel, and they were doing the prayer of conquest right at the altar. I'm telling you, people, you got to be careful how you talk about this stuff. But yeah, stuff's pretty dark out there.
It is. Where I go to work, there's a chapel, and very recently, after the say Nacho Mama occurrence happened, suddenly there were these pagan symbols and books from other religions and an Islamic prayer mat at the back of the chapel. They set up a little special space for people from other religions to come and use within a Catholic chapel. And I literally showed up for Mass. I was going to go to Mass before going up and rounding, and I see this crap there. So I gathered it up and I took it out of the chapel and I set it down outside in, just like a little waiting space in the hospital. And then I confronted the priest about it afterwards. And, sad to say, the priest is trying to defend the fact that they had all these pagan symbols, in the same space where you have the Blessed Sacrament being kept, in the tabernacle.
This is why, people go, why do you talk? I got an email from somebody once asking me why I do Catholic prophecy videos. And I'm like, things look as bad as Archbishop Lefebvre was saying towards the end. That's why. Yeah. I have his book, Open Letter to Confused Catholics. I recommend it if you've got questions about it. Go listen to it. I've got the whole 5-hour audio book on my channel that I recorded myself so that people could just get it right from him. Not me filtering it, not some other commentator. It's him. I'm just reading it verbatim with no commentary. And it's things like that make me really wonder just how bad is it. I'm not going to Chantism, but I understand why people go there. I fully understand it.
I will say, in some ways, that's almost the strongest argument maybe we are in the end times, because, I mentioned before that there have been plenty of dystopias people have lived through historically in the past. You didn't usually see that apostasy within the church taking place during them. You read stories of Soviet Russia and you had heroic in the underground. You know, if you reach like, you know, Archbishop, Christus Vincit. If you read Christus Vincit, he's talking about, you know, these priests who risk death to bring the mass to people, and especially to bring reconciliation to people. You didn't have priests putting pagan, you know, icons up as part of your dystopia there.
And actually, I think that's one of the things that I like about your book is the depiction of the underground church and why hard it is for people to get the sacraments, because when it really does come time to really sift the wheat from the chaff, you know, they're going to be good priests, and there's going to be apostatize because it's easier.
Yeah. And that is where I think sometimes the hard times do at least purify the church. And that's kind of what I still envision happening.
Thomas Keller, yes. I read Open Letter to Confused Catholics. I did that like at least a year ago, and I have it on the channel. So it's got like some of my audio issues that I had at that time, but you saying it's not, you know, it's just things are a little more echoey, I think. But yeah, I read that, and I want to do some of his other books, but, you know, right now is not a time to be, is not super things for my channel, because a lot of people just have their own misconceptions about things going on. But it's a great work, and it was written in the 80s, and it was written with mostly French examples, but man, it still hits home. It still so hits home. But yeah, if let's see, somebody's had something here. Watch, what was it? Colin asked if I got get a view of Ireland's secret cults. It's on YouTube. If you want to send me a link, Colin, to that, go ahead. I've got over 100 emails in my inbox right now, so it takes me a long time now to get back to people on things. Unless like I get the rare email notification on my phone, but most of the time I don't. But yeah, it might take me a while to get back to things. I still need to sit and watch that YouTube documentary about Hollywood that is getting suppressed. So you might know which one I'm talking about. Let's see. Peter Jansen gets us back to the catacombs for us. Better smear yourself with barbecue sauce for the Lions. Yeah. Well,
those of us who are putting our necks out now, we're not going to make it down into the catacombs with the rest of you guys. They'll round us up.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I look at the changes. There's already data about the changes coming to America, and some of them are like very unpolitically correct to talk about, but it's very clear where things, unless something happens, some radical change happens, and we are due. America is past due for a religious revival.
Yeah.
And the thing going on right now might actually trigger it, which would be, even if it's, you know, a religious revival like all the rest of them, which was for, you know, mainline Protestantism, it would still be a godsend. It might actually buy us a lot of time.
I mean, I've seen possibilities if you look at a lot of the private revelation recently. You know, one is the end times theory, but there is also the theory of a Marian age, right? A Marian age that sort of prefigures the final end times where Christ comes triumphant. Maybe this is a type we are going through now that prefigures the end times, and maybe it will be followed by a Marian age that would prefigure the triumph of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the best thing we can hope for right now. Although if it is the end times, then we just have to hope that the end times go quickly, right? That you know, it's 3.5 years and we're done soon or something, because
right. I don't think we're I don't somebody Benito Mussolina and
it's one of those things where you just, you know, we don't get to know, so all we can do is stay faithful come what may. And,
yeah, that's the whole thing. That's why, like, when people, like, you know, certain prelates, it is to be rigid, and I'm like, no, be rigid. It's, you know, the great saints and doctors of the church were rigid. Saint Alphonsus Liguori were rigid in times when that did not pay. You know, it'd be much easier. I could make, you know, given my education and what I'm writing my dissertation on, I could have a much easier scholar if I stopped doing this and I started writing articles for America Magazine and things, and yeah, it would be so much easier.
Oh yeah. Well, let's face it, that's a lot of times one of the main ways that the forces of darkness get people is it's just a glide into success a lot of the times if you follow that path. Mm-hmm. It's really hard in this world to stay faithful. Like, concupiscence is everywhere, right? People fall into it all the time, and then they really don't like it when other people resist it. So they're going to try to pull you down. So even in good times, it's hard, and in bad times like this, it's really hard to stay faithful.
Right, and I think honestly that's one of the things that really resonated with me with EMJ was his libido dominandi thesis. It's a form of political control. Like long before I was a Catholic, just musing with some friends of mine that just how degenerate TV was getting, that we would probably see open sexual stuff on by now. And I got pretty close. I didn't I never saw online streaming coming because it was before that. HBO, their original programming is so much more gross now than like most stuff getting into a Hollywood theater back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
I don't recommend this, but if you were to make an error of judgment, fall into sin by watching, say, Basic Instinct, the stuff in that movie is tame compared to HBO. I'm just,
and then if you really just think about what's actually accessible to the average person on a day-to-day basis, I mean, it's just as easy on your computer and pull up the kind of websites like TikTok and stuff, what's going on in those places, or heck, even YouTube, as it used to be to turn
them out of. And some people like that, it's not television. I'm like, that's probably their cell phones. I'm like, look, what's the difference between your cell phone and a television?
It's all screens.
It's the same thing, right? Like,
it's just a black box, right? Any kind of screen. It doesn't matter what the technology specifically is. I think a lot of prophecy is that way. It's not going to be as concrete as we'd all like, so we can absolutely recognize the reality of it. But
yeah, we only recognize what's going on once things have been going on for a while, which is,
right.
I mean, that having been said, pretty sure when the 3 days of darkness, if that happens, you're going to know immediately what's going on. Like some of these big things, when they happen, it's going to be unequivocal. But like, to see, are we going through the Great Apostasy now? The set of conscience would say, no, we started going through the Great Apostasy during the Second Vatican Council. Well, statement, but I understand why people make it, right? But I think the Great Apostasy is going to be a lot worse. Like, I think we're gearing up for it. But, I hope I'm wrong.
I don't know.
Am I using dial-up to stream? No, I'm not using dial-up to stream. I'm going to upgrade my internet soon, I promise.
I don't know if it has to be something that happens in like a year. I think it can be a generational apostasy at the same time. So who's to say that the apostasy didn't start 1950s, 1960s, and we're still in it?
Right. Someone asks me if I've seen Chosen yet, that they hadn't watched it yet. It's funny, I mentioned it earlier. We had a comment from someone in because I had mentioned how there was some heresy in it from what I understood, and then they watched it and saw that there was. So I personally won't watch it. They show our pains, and that's actually an explicit heresy. I just don't remember where it was condemned. James McCarthy asked me about Taylor Marshall's Padre Pio thing. The only thing I'm going to say about his thing, because I don't comment, is I found what was going on in the chat very interesting. That's all I'll say. I explicitly don't comment on other people's things going on because I made a promise to God that the typical YouTube silly drama that you see in every circle. I remember watching like bodybuilding videos, right? Like, here's how you do a bicep. Here's the proper form for a bench press. And I saw drama in those content creator circles. I'm like, it's because this platform is so easy to get. It's one of the reasons why I don't appear on camera just yet. Just because it's so susceptible to it. Although
what's frustrating too is...
it was St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, not St. Catherine Drexel. She said it would unleash tremendous evil into homes. And, well, yeah.
It is frustrating, though, because this can be such a tool for good. But, man, when content creators, good people, I mean, there's a lot of content creators.
And there's actually a lot of good Catholic content creators who don't make what I would call Catholic content. They make, like, political content or other things.
Yeah. But, man, when they get into that drama, it hurts all of us. It really does.
Right. There's an edgy sort of right-wing secular commentator who's actually Catholic. And in the last few months, he started the Bible at the end of every one of his videos. And he's a Catholic. When he does I won't say who it is because a lot of people are like, well, that guy's a fill in the blank-ist, but he just says unpopular things, right? Open-minded to a lot of things right now because when I entered the church, and I did the one thing you should probably not do if you're not ready for it, and earnestly beg God to correct me of my errors. And there are certain prayers God will give you. Like if you ask for them properly, He will absolutely give you without much any hesitation if you're ready. And one of them was correct my errors. And boy, I went from being kind of center, to the left of the center left to know where I am politically now, but I find the secular conservatives very amusing people.
It's like I remember watching a video of Father recommended, I think it was Father Ripperger, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think he recommended for Lent especially praying to your guardian angel, asking them to spiritually humble you throughout Lent.
That seems like a terrible idea if you're not ready for it.
It's one of those he said the only thing you do for Lent as a penance, like you will feel it, yeah. Yeah, we're praying the litany of humility too. If you're not ready for it, whoa, it's a great prayer, but it's a harder most of us, I think.
It is a hard one for most people. Right, it's easier, I think, for people to pick up devotions than it is to pick up
Yeah. The first time you pray it, and you're just kind of going through, and you're like, oh, whoa, like it just keeps going, and it gets harder as you go. So it's really good for the soul.
If you're joining me, if you're just joining me, the guest we have on, we've been going on a long time, but I'm having a conversation with Jacob Clearfield. He's the author of Anno Domini 2064, which is the first book in the series, which is a sort of dystopian, I guess you could say, quasi-science fiction novel about the basically rooted in Catholic prophecy about the near awaits us. It's a good read, and I'm putting in the chat now the link to his author page on Amazon, so you can have a read if you would like. Enjoyed the book. I read it cover to I read it, well, I won't say cover to cover, I read an electronic copy of it, but I read it front to back, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially since, unlike dystopian novels, it's not a total black pill. So
it's not.
You'll recognize elements of it too if you're familiar with that sort of literature from a lot of other dystopian novels, and that's nothing wrong with that at all. But that it doesn't have anything in, at least unless I missed it, was actually probably now that I think about it, my favorite dystopian novel, which is Starship Troopers. Not that whole movie from the 90s, hilariously bad.
Fun way to watch bad, but yes,
it's a one of those bad movies that's so bad.
You definitely have to pass though if you want to maintain custody of the eyes. Unfortunately,
there's at least one scene in that movie where you kind of got to look away, but the novel is really good, and Heinlein took a lot of flack for writing that novel. He got labeled a fascist for it.
Yeah. I would say don't explore a lot of explicitly fascist elements in the type of dystopia there. It certainly would draw more from, Solzhenitsyn, actual Soviet communism, 1980 world, kind of those kinds of elements.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned in the email as we were getting, there was a book I read as a kid that really stuck with me, and I can't even find it anymore. I think it was called Entry into the Game, but it was actually imagining a future where there was plenty of prosperity and most people didn't have to work, so the state just provided for them. And they were using virtual reality to take people and prepare them to go colonize other planets, because that's basically what they were just going to use the people for, have a job. Mm-hmm. And definitely, I was trying in my book to think of a way that the remnant could exist, and when there's just so much surveillance taking place. And thinking of that book kind of gave me my answer in the idea of the use of virtual reality, and that if you could, essentially hack the system, if you had some inside people who could find workarounds, you could potentially space in the virtual world to exist and socialize, because it's not like ancient Rome, where overpowering state that is expressly forbidding your religion, but their ability to enforce it is pretty limited. You can still just get together at someone's house, an idea. In the world we're going into, surveillance is going to be so easy for large states. Going underground, a much more monumental task, as far as I can see. And so I just was trying to imagine what the church could even do to get around. The best solution I could honestly think of would be you'd have to find some way. You'd have to have a few skilled people, honestly, in that world for you and maintain it. Because otherwise, you can't have a church of just individuals completely separated from each other.
Right. This is where I bring into the idea that one reason you might want to consider reading this is because it gives you some insight into, what your life might be if things go down. What you might have to do just to avoid things. Of course, there's sort of an event in that before the book that really, eliminates that worry for a lot of people. But I won't say what it is because, again, you should read it's, I enjoyed it. So I did write a review on Amazon for it. There were only two like purchase reviews. So if you do get a copy, I saw a few of you go and leave an honest Amazon review. We're not gonna do what some authors might do, which is say give me a glowing review, yada yada yada. That's be honest. We're Catholic. Honest review after you read it.
I will say it does make a difference. We talked a little bit earlier about how going to publishers, and I even had in this case Timothy Gordon trying to talk the book up for me a little bit to publishers. So there's just no interest from publishers right now in Catholic fiction. But self-publishing, I'm still trying to figure out how you get your book recognized. And one thing I have learned is that reviews make a huge algorithms that they run. So I tried paying for a little bit of advertising and it just went nowhere because there really weren't reviews. So if people read it and like it, it make a difference to leave a review behind.
Yes, and remember, a lot of you have been around on my channel a while now, know that I used to put in the community section new Catholic content creators, their channels. And, I did that a couple weeks ago with the Theology of the Buddy podcast people. I put their YouTube channel on the community page because a lot of potential right now. We do need, I think, more Catholics out there, providing material for us. It can't just be a handful of us, with videos. I mean, come on, if guys like Tim Pool are right, we're all going to be gone here in 6 months anyway. So, although I think he might be exaggerating a little bit, but still, I do think that that I enjoyed the book. I do think if you want it, you should go check it out. And you may hear more from it in the future. But let's see, Taylor Marshall knows how to market. He's been very book, and I heard that he went on One America News, which is interesting to say the least. The movie Catholics is good. Yeah, that is a dystopian novel or a movie that I never even thought to talk about. I still haven't watched all of it, but what I've seen of it is just so cringy. Yeah, I could see it. The Pope pronouncing himself the Father General of all the religions of the world. I could almost see it if the Chardins of the world get their way.
Well, that Supreme Committee of Human Fraternity, if we're okay with it, maybe, right?
That's my video tomorrow, by the way, guys, is on the higher committee fraternity. I don't even know if these guys realize what they sound like to those of us who know about much of things going on.
I'll give some credit to Roy Schumann, who's another great Catholic content creator. He really pointed out in one video what a difference it made of grace, and you have the Holy Spirit kind of giving you the eyes to see versus what people see when they don't have that. I think it's true.
And read it as if the main character isn't an alien, but he's an actual person of faith in an atheistic world. Because I think that would be an interesting. Because I that's something that's been coming back to me a lot lately. Is just that alienation.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, I mean, for those who join, it's
we got that severe.
So often
we have that severe lag again.
Yeah. Well, anytime we get into deep thoughts,
Right, that's the problem. Once you start, and so he hams it up like those movies.
Oh. Well, how to up? I'm not sure if 80s action movies is the way to go, but I mean, we could.
No, let's. I'll again go ahead and check out his. We're lagging. Wait till we're not lagging before we try to wrap this up. All right, we're back again from our mini lag. I'm gonna say that we're gonna wrap this up now because we're 2.5 hours now. The guest is Jacob Clearfield. His book is Anno Domini 2064. It's on Amazon. You can find them. Please go check it out if you're interested. It's a sort of dystopian novel rooted heavily in Catholic prophecy and in the Catholic faith. So it's reading for Catholics if you're worried about that kind of thing. And it's a new Catholic author. This is your first book, right? Didn't even ask you that. There you go. Yep. So go ahead and have a read. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you guys again.